Every real estate agent needs a variety of contractors and professionals that they can point to in different situations. And none more important than the home inspector, because especially in a buyer beware state, this is your one and only opportunity to inspect the property before you go and finalize that sale. And so Chris is one of those professionals that I point to regularly and say, hey, have Chris inspect the homes. Chris is with Four Corners. He is licensed in just about everything. You've been a builder.
Yes.
You've rehabbed homes. You've flipped homes. You've built new construction. You're licensed in, as you put, the most stringent Godfather version of the home inspector, because there's two versions, right?
Yes, ASHI and INTERNACHI.
Yep. You have HVAC licensing. Gas. Am I missing anything on that list?
Certified mode, radon, energy audits.
Basically everything.
Basically a lot of stuff.
But you've been in the construction world for how long now?
Altogether, probably about 22 years.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, what made you decide at what point to get like the home inspection? Was it just like, I'm bored, I want to add another thing like notch to my belt, or why did you even go that route?
I'm getting older, just like everyone else. And I believe it was just something that I think it was just the next iteration on me getting something different where it piqued my curiosity as a builder, but more so in the last couple of years as a rehabber. I felt like I wasn't really using my brain as much.
Okay,
right?
interesting. Yeah.
So I've always been a knowledge geek.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt like I needed to transition over to something that I can better use my brain and my mind and continue that. So that pretty much.
When you said it's a little easier on the body than
it's
maybe
a little easier on the body.
or,
yes. Even though towards the end I wasn't doing that, but I found out that home inspection is very physical as well.
Okay.
Well,
crawling in crawl spaces is no joke.
That is true.
Yeah. Better you than me. I'm a big boy, so I get stuck under those little spaces. I want to start off strong. So share with me maybe one of the wildest stories over the last couple of years in inspecting, something that you're just like, holy crap.
Well, I don't know, is it more stories, but all my life I've had this weird sixth sense.
Okay. And
multiple times, even as recently as probably a month ago, I go into houses and it's always over my left shoulder. I see people that's not supposed to be there. Okay. And at first, a couple years back, it was
a certified ghost finder on
houses.
But
I think that's what I'm going to contact you for, maybe starting a new YouTube, the ghost inspector.
Okay,
right?
The Hampton Roads ghost inspector.
I'm not crazy, right? But definitely, I always see them over my left shoulder, and I describe them.
Okay.
And they follow me sometimes throughout the process.
All right.
And it used to freak me out, but now I just say, hey, I'm inspecting your house and leave me alone. But
what about some of the, what's the craziest thing you found in a house that because a lot of times what we'll do is we'll go, you finish up the house, and one of the things that you do, I think, is you're really good with clients and kind of quelling fears of hey, every house has little issues here and there. There's no house, even new construction, many times that doesn't have some deficiency. And you have this calm about you where you'll come and say, hey, overall great house. We found a few things, a couple different items. But have you ever come to that and you're like, oh man, I really got to lay a hard one on them here?
Yesterday.
Okay.
The house it was only 1,000 square foot home.
Okay.
But we found over 70 things wrong. It was recently renovated.
Okay.
And there's only so many things that I can cover, but more importantly, there's only so many ways I can break it to you that you have major structural repairs that's going to cost a lot of money.
Sure.
Right? Because every house has issues, like you said, right? Is it $200 or is it $250,000?
Sure. And it's a house. It's just like a car. They wear out, they break down. You have to replace tires, you have to replace a water pump, a timing belt, that type of thing. It's always odd to me when people feel like a house should never break down or have issues or wear and tear. Like even in the room here, there's paint that it's an older house, and so it has to go back and fix up the chipping paint.
Sure.
What so I think one of the things I think with new home buyers, if they need to be paying attention to hiring, like let's say they're in a different area of the state, they're not in this area, and they need to hire somebody, what would be your guidance if you were like guiding your niece or nephew across the?
I think
maybe what are some of the questions they should ask? I guess maybe a better question.
I think most importantly is first and foremost pick a realtor that's really good, knows the market, knows the area like yourself. I paid him to say that. But I think using their expertise, their guide on who they know, who they've worked with in the past.
Okay. So like a reputation.
Reputation,
okay.
And first and foremost, that would be your first go-to, I think. And then secondly, we're in an age where there's bukus of social media review sites, Google reviews, and use that to read the reviews, right? Because if you have 100 reviews and they're all 5 stars, it's not by mistake.
Yeah.
So.
Plus, I mean, if there are negative reviews, you can see how they respond to it. And,
exactly.
I think that's always been really nice. Is like Google and Yelp in particular. They don't give you control over getting rid of bad reviews.
That is true.
And so I always find it interesting if they do have a bad review, how does the owner handle that? How do they respond to it? Do they just ignore it? Because you can have some crazy clients, but there are genuine mistakes that happen on occasion.
Nobody's perfect.
Yeah. So it immediately made me think of Sean in The Office where Pam says to Dwight during he has like the doomsday device, and she says, Poe buddies, no, nerve it. Never mind. All right. But so they go with the reputation. Are there any like questions that are worthwhile asking? How many homes have you inspected? Are you familiar with old homes? Like,
what I get asked a lot is basically more so, how do I approach an inspection?
Okay.
Right? And for me, when I started Four Corners Inspection, for me personally, family is always priority, right? So I always convey to my clients that above all else, I'm going to inspect your house like it's for my own family, and to make sure that they're getting a house that is priority number one is safe. So they usually ask me, so how do I go about that? What do I check? Do I walk the roof, or do I check every single window? Because the standard of home inspections doesn't require us as home inspectors to check every single window. It's one window, one outlet per room.
Really?
Which is crazy.
Okay.
Because just because one is working doesn't mean the others are working.
Especially if they're older windows.
Exactly.
Like mine are over 100 years old.
So I always try to convey to them how I would approach an inspection, and I get that a lot.
Would it be worthwhile for them to look up what the standards are, like, and see what actually an inspection includes before they go buy their first home?
That would be someone who's always above and beyond, right?
Okay. I mean, I can tell you the amount of clients that I've had that do that are very small.
Exactly. I was going to say,
yeah.
Because when I create an inspection profile for my client, once they accept before they accept the agreement, they can also see the standards of what we go by.
Sure.
What I go by specifically. It's all written black and white. How we're going to inspect the windows, what we're going to do is a limited visual inspection.
Okay.
Right? We're not there with a magnifying glass. But I always try to do my best. And if I see something, I'm going to further investigate.
Gotcha. What are some things that maybe are misconceptions that people feel like I thought that was covered in the home inspection that isn't, or what are some, we'll give a good example. I think you and I talked about on a deal where the washer and the dryer being tested isn't necessarily something that always gets tested because it's not technically a system of the house.
Sure.
Am I wrong there, or am I saying that right?
ASHI, the organization that sets the standards, is the standards are there to protect first and foremost the home inspector, right? Because there's so many variables that go into in a home inspection and so many systems. So for a basic standard, we're not obligated to turn on water valves. We're not obligated to walk a roof.
Okay.
Right? We're not obligated to go into a crawl space if we deem those things are unsafe. What constitutes unsafe is judgment of the inspector.
No, it's completely subjective.
It's subjective, exactly.
Interesting.
I forgot your question.
Like, the limits of the inspection, or what,
Okay.
what's included and kind of what's not included. Because I had, I'll give you an example, then I'll let you answer. Is
Okay.
like I had a washer dryer situation where we closed on the house.
Sure.
The inspector, not Chris, didn't test the washer machine and dryer. They closed on the house. Really weird situation. A couple weeks later, I get a phone call from my client. Hey, Dan, I have water coming out the side of my house. And I'm like, bro, are you high? Like, what's going on here? And he's like, no, I have water coming out the side of my house. I'm like, all right, send me a photo or a video. Like, I got to see this, because I legitimately thought my person was like high or something along those lines. Well, sure enough, there's like water coming out the siding of the house. The previous garage had been converted into a master/laundry area, right? Instead of it just being a garage with a laundry in there.
Sure.
Well, they put a full bathroom in there, and the plumbing was not large enough to handle both at the same time. And so what they ended up doing is they took the washing machine, when they did the conversion, I don't know, in the 90s or something along those lines, and they took the gray water from the washing machine and had it go out into the lawn for their garden. And then it looked like there was two pipes, because at some point it looked like they basically put it into where the French drains were, and then it went out to the street.
A natural drain field.
So, I mean, I guess sometime in the 90s, it was basically the regulations came out and said, hey, you can't do this anymore. But it used to be legal.
Sure.
And so whoever redid the siding sometime in the early 2000s cut that thing off in the wall, put the siding up. And who knows how long it's been happening. But the previous owner claimed that they didn't know about it, or they're like, I don't know, we've always done our laundry, we never noticed any difference. So, but we didn't catch that, or who knows if we would have caught it if we ran the dishwasher, or are we going around the outside when it just so happens to be doing the pump and going out? Would that have even been caught? So, like, I guess going back to my question is, like, what do you find, like, what are some of the limitations of inspections?
So let's build on that comment in terms of misconceptions with the washer dryer, right? So as a home inspector, we are not allowed to turn on any, I call them water controls, but basically faucets in terms of underneath valves.
Anything that's been turned off?
Yes, we cannot turn on. Just in case we turn it on, it breaks and starts flooding the house.
Or was broken and turned off for a reason.
Exactly.
Okay.
So if, let's say I get to a house and they have a washer dryer and the washer and dryer is not conveying, we regardless always run a cycle on the washing machine.
When you say we, you mean your company?
Myself, yeah, and my team.
Okay.
Regardless of whether or not the appliances are conveying or leaving.
Sure.
Right. And a lot of home inspectors, because the standards, if they're not going to stay, they don't have to test the appliance.
Interesting.
We test regardless, because just because it's there, it's leaving, doesn't mean that the drain is not functioning correctly. So we always run a cycle, make sure the drain for the washer is sufficient. And we always run a cycle, make sure the 220 appliance, if it's 220 for electrical, for the dryer is working, or the gas is working. Another major misconception we get often is, I think a lot of buyers are always on the assumption that a home inspection is where we find and document everything about a house like if it's brand new, right? And it's not. We're there to basically document deficiencies based on a certain standard that we're guided by, and basically offer some, at times, resolution on how to fix these.
Sure.
But mostly as a home inspector, we're supposed to find issues and defer to qualified individuals.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it, or at least one of the ways that I've told my clients, whether they're first-time home buyers or even repeat, is your home inspector is a lot like your family practitioner. They know a lot about like a lot of different categories. But if it's a foundation issue, they're going to say, hey, talk to a foundation expert. If it's an electrical issue, hey, it's based on the standards that I'm taught to inspect on, this is deficient. However, the resolution or the fixing of this item, you need to talk to a licensed contractor in this area.
Sure.
And that's what your family doctor does a lot of times. Hey, I'm not a knee person. I'm not an eye person. I'm not an ear person. However, based on your blood work, based on your hearing test, based on the pain that you're describing, you need to go talk to this professional. And I think that's the easiest way to look. You feel like that's a fair way to describe it?
That's exactly how it is. Like I said, most home inspectors are guided by the ASHI standard or NASHI, and they're basically find issues, defer them, and not basically accept the liability.
Sure.
I feel like I'm a little different because I'm Class A, the highest licensing they have, builder for the state of Virginia.
Sure.
I come with a little bit more training and licensing to basically be able to further say, hey, this is how you would fix an issue like this.
Okay.
Okay. So I feel like because of my training and my licensing, I'm allowed to do that and feel confident in giving some of those corrections.
Sure. I'm sure there's a newer inspector out there who is like, doesn't have that confidence and is just like, based on my training, this is sufficient. You should have it looked at.
Yeah. So, for instance, I use this often is if I go into your house and I'm inspecting your electrical panel, and if I say, Dan, we found incorrect phasing of conductors in your electrical panel, and we're supposed to defer.
Sounds fancy.
Yeah. And
Fancy
we're supposed to defer.
Yeah.
Have a licensed electrician evaluate. And when you leave the inspection, you may say, oh my God, that sounds terrible. It's electrical, but the fix for it is put some black tape on that white wire. It's just the wrong color wire.
Yeah. The other one I think is really funny, and this is a big reason why I think pre-inspections, we'll hit on that in here in a second, is the idea of at the bottom of the junction box where you have the main wire that comes in,
Sure, the incoming
if
service.
that gasket or that like...
the bumper guard or metallic
yeah,
guard.
yeah. What's that, 15 cents at the store?
You can buy two for like $1 something now since COVID. Yeah.
But what is it? What does an electrician charge to come out and do that?
At minimum, probably $120 to show up, and then probably about 30 minutes of your time. So probably about.
And what do you think every buyer's agent that's worth their salt who is advocating hard for their client, what do they write? All work to be conducted by licensed and insured contractors, receipts and pictures upon, before walkthrough.
Exactly.
And so it's little items like that where, I'll see those deficiencies, especially with first time home buyers, and they're like, oh my gosh, Dan, I have to have this taken care of. And I'm like, I understand you feel that way. And I'm not saying I won't ask for it, but you do realize that this is a 15-cent piece. It's been built since the 1950s and it hasn't burnt down since the 1950s. Sure. Yes. Best practice would suggest that these things need to happen, but it's not that it's not the end of the world. I promise you.
And that's why I and you see my inspection reports. So I always like to reference what I would like to use as a contractor, and directly with links how they can pick it up or where they can pick it up at the big box stores. So when they see, hey, this is a 90-cent part.
Well, it's easy for agents and I think even inspectors to just go deficient. And then they get to wipe their hands off and say, well, I guess you can ask for it to get done.
Sure.
And then agents will do the same thing because most of them are chicken shits and don't want to give any advice, or they're just they're overly cautious.
Sure.
They're scared to say, hey, this is something that you probably could do yourself, especially electrical, plumbing, HVAC. I've done, and some of this is I've done some of this myself. When I was young, especially in the Navy, I did all of my own car mains. I did all of my own house repairs because I couldn't freaking afford to pay anybody. Right? It's like, well, if I call the electrician, that's $140. Well, guess what? That's half my grocery bill, right? And so it was just for the month, right? And so it was just I had to figure those things out. And so you'll have something like, let's say, a leaking toilet where the back of the toilet's loose, right? Technically, you could say that has to be done by a plumber, but if you had to pull it off and replace the gasket and replace the hardware, maybe $15 worth of materials, and if you figure out how to do it yourself, maybe an hour's worth of work. But if you hire a plumber, again, it's going to cost you $90 to $120 for them to do that, if not a little bit more. And so I get really irritated when agents are unwilling to be like, hey, look, this is an item that you probably could figure out how to do yourself. I think they're overly nervous or chick might be the word.
Liability, I guess.
I get it. But it's not. I think the thing that I think about, what you had mentioned on earlier, is there's no such thing as a perfect house.
Sure.
Right. And some of these items, Sean and I were just doing some filming yesterday where I used the term nose blindness. You ever heard that term?
Not.
Well, I mean, the idea would be it's what's called your difference threshold in psychology. So the idea would be your brain sends a signal, hey, that smells weird, or that stinks, or that's too bright. At some point, especially when it comes to smell, your brain goes, hey, I can continue to send a signal, but it's not helpful at all, right? Smells like dog. After a certain period of time, your brain goes, hey, not important to pay attention to anyway because he hasn't done anything about it.
Sure.
Right? And so sometimes those smells are like the smell of like, I'll just be gross here, feces. Well, because if you stick around feces for too long, you can get sick and you can die. And your body's trying to tell you, hey, you shouldn't be around whatever this smells like. Dogs being gross dog smell. Well, if you're around gross, dirty dog all the time, you can get sick from it. And so your brain is trying to protect you. But at some point, your brain says, hey, this signal's being ignored. I'm no longer going to send the signal. So you can go into someone's house that smells like cat piss. And it's like, how do they not smell this? Because they're nose blind to it. They can no longer smell it. Well, the same thing goes, I think, for like minor repairs, smudges, like visual blindness. So like if your kids leave smudges all over the walls, sometimes the homeowner, like they almost don't see it.
You see it every day.
Or your HVAC requires you to kick it twice and, go up and down on the thermostat, past 70, back down and back up for it to like kick on for some weird reason, right? Well, the homeowner has gotten so used to that, they don't even think twice about it. Oh, it's been working for me for 15 years. Why should I repair it? And so I think it's a really interesting concept when you're buying a new home to understand that in many ways that homeowner has lived in this place, especially if it's 5-10 years. They've just managed the way it is, and they don't see a whole lot wrong with it. Or even if it is broken, they're like, we've kind of kicked it along the road. So I think we're entering into a new market where you have the opportunity to start asking for more of that. But it was for like almost 2 years there. It was like, bro, sorry. There's 14 other people behind you. You have to accept this house as it is and repair it afterwards, or you find another house.
I definitely have seen that shift. And in any market, of course, as you know, in your field, whether the advice of realtors are, way more than other times. Just like those last 2 years, like you touched up on, our inspections were either information only or they weighed them all together. Yeah. Which is crazy, what I find. Sure. But in the last probably about 3 months, definitely a change. You can ask for more, and our inspections actually mean something. Yeah. Right. So.
Sure. I personally, in general, would say like if you have the opportunity, you should never buy a house without a home inspection. Even if you're not going to ask for repairs, at least knowing that things are there. Because I've had people over the last 2 years that have bought a house without a home inspection contingency. And I said, hey, look, I understand that you were comfortable with that. We were up against a whole bunch of offers. This is the only way you're going to get the house under contract. However, before you move into that house, I highly recommend that you still have the inspection. What if there's a leak that you don't know about? Sure. And it might be $500, $1,000 to repair. It sucks that you bought the house and you have to adopt that problem. However, if you don't know about it and you let it keep going for another 2-3 years, it could turn into a $5,000 or $10,000 repair. And so there are lots of or even small electrical things. Go back to like the thing that's a small electrical issue. Well, if you're a very risk averse person, it might be sensible for you to get that inspection so you can go, hey, that previous owner having an uncovered junction box in the crawl space might have been comfortable with that. Me, not so much. Sure. Right? I'm just not willing to take on that risk. And so I would advise them to go ahead and get the inspection before they close.
And that kind of circles back to something we touched upon when you said misconceptions, right? And how important it is for a home inspection. For Virginia, and as well as most states, home inspections, I think a lot of people who call me and they ask me questions about my inspection, and I always tell them that home inspections are only technically good for the time that we're out there. Sure. And they sometimes think that once we inspect the house, it's like a warranty, right? Good forever. It's good forever, yeah. But it's not. It's only good for the number of hours that we're out there. Sure. So it's very important. If the home inspector is out there for only 2 hours, they're super thorough and be able to document and find things that are unsafe or not functioning. Yeah. Right.
Well, not only good for the time that you're there. Again, go back to the car example. I love going by the cars because I feel like everybody's a car owner for the most part. They can relate to it a lot more. You get your state inspection. How long is that inspection good for? usually 1 year, right? You could drive out of that inspection and something could go wrong next week. It doesn't mean that the time they inspected it wasn't working and perfectly fine.
Exactly.
And a good mechanic would probably say, like, well, can you guarantee me that this will last XYZ miles? And they're going to say, no, I can't guarantee that. I had we have Rachel's old car before we just got the minivan. Hurt my heart to say that. We had a Lexus GX 460, which is like the Lexus version of the 4Runner. And we were at 160,000 miles or so, and the starter started going, right? It's just like every now and then it was like chick, 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 and then it would go. But eventually it died. So we go get the starter replaced. A month later, similar symptom comes up, and I'm like, all right, I want to check the battery. Let me check this. Let me check that. And I go back to the mechanic. I'm like, hey, could you just take a look at it? It's doing the same thing. Just so happens it was a live-in part, right? Only like 6,000 miles on it, and it's done. Yeah, it was under warranty, and they replaced it, but that part was gone. Same thing happened here in our house. So we had a new HVAC. When we first moved in, we knew the HVAC system needed to be replaced, so we went ahead and got it replaced. It was just the reality of the home purchase that we made. Well, the HVAC guy comes in and installs it. We have a brand new air handler down in the basement, and like a month later, there was something that was went wrong with it. And it just so happened that one of the parts on a brand new system went bad. And that stuff happens. And so it's always funny to me when people think like you're going to buy the house and they get so angry. They missed this. I'm like, maybe if they and I think any good inspector, this kind of goes into what I think before we started, I really wanted to ask you is like, sometimes it's hard. I think it's hard to be an inspector because you can only do so much while you're there. But people expect it to do everything and cover everything and it be perfect when and nothing to go wrong. So how do you feel like the right way to handle those things when things do come up?
Well, I always try to, regardless of whether our inspection is only good for technically the hours that we're there, but I'm all about customer relations and helping my clients. So, if anything, haven't had really anything. Knock on fake wood. I've never really had to diffuse a situation from our inspections.
Okay.
But I had a client who had an inspection from us, and after they moved in, one of the parts of the main sewer line started leaking, cast iron, right? Of course, you never know with cast iron, but she felt that we should have caught that. But
that's
I'm
what
like,
yeah.
It wasn't leaking. We had videos everywhere and documented, but I always try to be above and beyond with customer service. So I sent one of my guys out there from a contractor side, and we basically put a cap on it. Took us 15 minutes, and everyone's happy, right?
Do you have just for the people at home who don't know anything about the inspector world? Are there like insurances or liability insurance, air emissions?
Yes. That type of thing? By Virginia and most states require minimum a general liability.
Okay.
So that is a general liability for home inspectors would be if I'm on premise and I happen to damage your property.
Okay.
Then that pays for it.
Okay.
Also, there's professional liability, E&O, errors and omission. So just in case I
genuinely make a mistake,
that insurance should cover it.
Okay.
Never had to use it.
Yeah.
Right. So, not gonna fake wood again. Right. Yeah. But that is in place. So just in case.
Okay.
And there's other programs out there through another organization like Internachi that have the buyback program, but. Yeah.
Again, knock on wood, it hasn't happened yet.
Yes.
I had a VA buyer who's like, well, I can waive the home inspection because the VA does theirs. And I'm like, whoa. Yeah,
so there's a huge difference between a thorough home inspection versus a VA or FHA appraisal.
Okay.
I probably consider the appraisals are very limited because they don't go through the crawl spaces. They most of the time do not walk roofs. They're there to find mostly something that's very unsafe, something that's glaringly not functional.
Yeah. They're looking for like minimum habitable standards.
Exactly.
Yeah. So with the VA loan, I believe it's called MPRs, minimum property requirements. With FHA, it's called minimum property standards. they're very, very similar. I don't think there's much of a difference between the two. I think there was once I remember looking up we had a very unique situation where it was like the roof had to have a minimum of 3 years of life on it or something along those lines. And so the VA appraiser required that we had a specific roof inspection and a roofer to come out and basically say, yes, it has more or less than that.
Was for the grant too. We had to have 5.
Okay, interesting. So FHA was 5.
That
And they may
part
have
always
changed that.
crazy makes me laugh because no one can tell you whether I have 3 or 5.
Sure. Again, it's
unless you
like
have
tell me this motor. Like
Yeah.
this motor has 3 years of life on it. This
Exactly.
starter has so. Or tires is another good example. It's like these tires have X amount of life. It's like, well, how do you drive and do you rotate the tires and you're doing like it's so difficult to do. And it took us 3 roofers before someone was willing to say something because I mean you have to put your name on that, right?
That is true.
But I think for the people at home, what's really important to understand here is that when you hire a home inspector, this is your advocate. They're your inspector. Right? You're paying them, they're your professional. The majority of the VA, and they claim that it's to protect the VA and FHA, and it does, but it's also to protect the banks. Because when the VA and the FHA, when they back those loans, they don't want you defaulting on that loan, right? And if you have holes in the floor, if the appliances don't work, if the HVAC system doesn't work, even though you say, hey, I'm willing to buy it, the FHA or the VA want to go, you know what, that's pretty high risk, and we don't want you to buy that house because we also don't want to have to pay out a large chunk of money because you're doing with the VA 100% financing or FHA with a grant, you might only be putting 1% down. They don't want to have to pay that loan out and back it if you default on it. So they don't want you to default it. But those minimum property standards and requirements are very minimum.
Yes.
They're very minimum.
And there's so much of a variance there from one appraiser to another. I've heard an appraiser stay on the property. Shouldn't be. I've heard from other realtors that they had an appraiser stayed out there for 3 hours.
Really?
And some came through, just drove by, and 5 minutes later,
yeah, don't get me started on appraisers. They get me irritated. I'm gonna.
Hey, I was once an appraiser.
Really?
Yes.
You did that too? Good Lord.
And a realtor. Yeah.
That's right. Oh my gosh. All right. So home inspections, one of the things I wanted to cover was pre-inspections. That's something that you do as well. Is it the same level of inspection, or what does that usually look like?
For us, I'm not sure about other inspectors, but for us, for a pre-listing, we're going to go through that house just like our regular inspections.
Yeah.
We're there to find everything that we feel like it may show up on a regular inspection. We're there to make sure that it's safe, it's sound, it's functional. Sometimes I probably get a little bit more neurotic on a pre-listing.
Why is that?
Because I'm there to basically...
It's because you might have an inspector coming after you?
Yeah, exactly. and home inspectors, I know we follow a certain standard.
Okay.
But not all home inspectors are built the same, just like all realtors and whoever else are not mechanics are not all built the same. Yeah. We're not supposed to call out cosmetic issues because that's subjective. I could say, Dan, this is a beautiful paint job. It's like my painter did an awful job, right? But some inspectors, which I have seen, because as a contractor, I have done repairs for other agents and I receive inspection reports, and they call out paint. Cosmetic issues. So when I do a pre-listing, I want to document everything that may come up with someone else.
Sure.
Even though I would never call it out because we're not supposed to call it out.
So agents, I know quite a few agents that don't like doing pre-listing inspections because they feel like, well, if I know about it now, I have to disclose it. And there's definitely a difference between something that is a material fact or something that is just, hey, this is maintenance or repairs that need to be done. Personally, I think that there are more arguments. It's not a black or white issue. There are more arguments for doing a pre-inspection than not doing one. The idea here is I want you go on market. I want you to be presented in the best possible light, and I want you to go to closing with the very first buyer that you're get under contract with. If we can find, let's just say your HVAC system's 6-7 years old. Okay, now they should last a little bit longer than that.
17 to 20.
Yeah, I mean, they should.
Yeah, should.
But have you ever inspected an HVAC system that has a leak or an issue on it? that's only 6 or 7 years old.
Oh, definitely.
Yep. So what happens when you get the home inspection, the buyer gets a home inspection, and there's something wrong with it, or it's slightly underperforming? They think something's wrong with it. And again, you go from the seller's market that we've been in to maybe a more balanced or a buyer's market. What do they tend to do? Do they ask just for the repair, or do they ask for a massive credit, or do they ask for it to be replaced? Well, you can avoid all of that conversation if you do the pre-inspection, and let's just say it's running 2 or 3 degrees warmer than it should or cooler than it should during winter or summer, and you address that before you go on market. Okay, well, maybe you don't disclose the pre-inspection because you don't want them to know that it was, running prior, but what you can market it as, hey, this has been pre-inspected, all major issues have been addressed. Or you can say it wasn't pre-inspected, and you can just throw it on market without the pre-inspection. And guess what happens when they go to their inspector goes to inspect the HVAC system? It's not deficient. So what do they not ask for? A credit or those types of issues.
Exactly.
And that's just one example.
Yeah, and another example is somebody who, let's say they've been in that house for 20 years or 15 years, and now they're wanting to call you to list their house. Well, I don't think they've crawled into their crawl space in the last 10 years, right?
Yep.
For whatever possibly physical condition or whatever. So if we were to do a pre-listing, which I find often, maybe there's been a leak or it's actively leaking. Let's correct that issue so that it won't show up on a buyer's inspection.
Sure. Yeah, in my opinion, I think you should do, especially for our area, this isn't for nationwide because some don't require termite moisture inspections. But for a pre-listing, I like to have a pre-inspection from a home inspector and then a termite moisture inspection prior to listing, preferably at least a week, if not 2 weeks prior to list. Because if you do find issues, it does give you enough time to address some of those issues. And I also like to have the home inspector and the termite moisture guy out at the same time, because there is some overlap between what you inspect and what they inspect, and 2 sets of eyes is better than 1. And if there is any question, you can have a conversation right there.
Definitely.
Versus trying to get you to connect and call this person, blah, blah, blah. Hey, did you see this? Oh, no, I didn't see that. Let me go, oh, yeah, I guess, yeah, that is an issue. I want to make sure I get, put that on the report. The other thing I think on pre-inspections, and this is for agents at home that, especially here in the Tidewater area or anywhere that has a termite moisture inspection that you need to pay attention to, is I am not saying that termite moisture companies are, I think they have a wonderful role. I think it's absolutely necessary, and there are really good companies out there. However, there's a saying that the system drives the incentive. And when your system says, our system, i.e. the contract says, home inspection, or if left blank 1%, and that 1% the seller is obligated to termite and moisture, walkthrough, septic and well, and come on, brain, appraisal issues, appraisal conditions, right? Those four categories. The most common one on there is termite moisture. Second most common is appraisal, right? Termite moisture companies that are savvy of contracts understand that when you're under contract and you do the inspection, there's usually some type of obligation there, right? And so, hey, this needs to be done, $400, $500, right? Especially if it's under the cap. A lot of times they don't push back on it, and they know they can get that work paid out. So if you're going to do pre-listing inspections as an agent, I highly recommend that you use one company. If something is found, just go ahead and bite the bullet, pay the extra $75, $100 to get a second opinion just to make sure. It's not to say that the first person is unethical or bad, but your job is not to not hurt your contractor's feelings. Your job is to be the best advocate for your client as possible. And I have probably saved thousands of dollars by doing that. Do the pre-inspection. One, I don't have another termite moisture company if I go to listing and I say, hey, we already have the clear termite moisture letter, here it is. And when they say, well, we want our guy, go, hey, look, we have 3 other offers. If you want us to accept your offer, you're going to accept our termite moisture company letter. And I might even push and say, look, I had 2 of them under there, right? And so it's been double checked. Then I'd also have control, because I know that what my termite moisture guy, and it's been double checked, is $400 or $500. I can't control what another company is or whether they're ethical or unethical. So if you want to potentially, it's one of the cheapest possible things you can do as a listing agent to save your client hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in an area that has a termite moisture inspection. I think that's one of the best pieces of advice I can give for agents out there. Would you?
Yeah, definitely.
You want to add anything to that?
No, I think you pretty much summed it up pretty well. Whenever I go on inspections for the home, a lot of times the termite moisture inspectors out there, and like you said, we always bounce ideas. I always try to go after them so they can clear the cobwebs for me, but we always bounce ideas because, like you said, 4 eyes are definitely better than 2. So
Yeah. Older homes. What do you top 3 or 4 or 5 things that people need to be aware of just in older homes that you see all the time on inspection that maybe you have an opinion on? That's
older homes. I think what's most important for me is always the electrical.
Okay.
Because
why is that?
Just because if anything that may cause an unsafe condition that would be more of a concern for the residents, there would be something electrical that may cause a fire. And a lot of older homes may have some electrical systems that was acceptable. And we talked about this earlier, acceptable at construction, but because it's changing standards, and we know more than what we did back then. Right?
You're talking about knob and tube.
Knob and tube, yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It's there. It's working.
I mean, if it was built in 1910 and it's 2022.
Exactly.
I mean, it's been there for a long period of time.
It's still been working.
It doesn't mean that you said there aren't inherent risks or limitations to the system.
Sure.
So maybe you could expand on that. What are some of the limitations of like knob and tube?
Well, knob and tube itself, just the way that they ran the conductors and the components they're not, I guess, shielded conductors like they use today, like a Romex type. The components are, let's say, if there's an up in the attic, they're mostly conductors running independent.
When you say Romex, what does that mean?
Romex is basically a manufactured name.
Okay.
It's a popular name brand.
Sort of
most
like
likely,
Kleenex?
Basically,
Okay,
yeah.
all
It's
right.
widely used throughout. It's non-metallic conductors, meaning the conductors, the wires inside is also encapsulated by a flexible PVC or other material versus a metallic, which is like a metal conduit of some sort. Knob and tube basically is, for the most part, unprotected, where it connects to some of the components to continue the circuit. Also, many of the knob and tube, of course, because it's older, back then they use aluminum wiring.
Okay.
Aluminum wires are decent conductors. They're not great compared to what is used today's copper. Right?
Okay.
So they can't handle the load
Right.
as today's conductors could.
Yeah. So if they're running too much amperage through that, what ends up happening?
It could basically cause the wire to heat up. And sometimes what we'll see is when we go into an inspection, they still have some older circuits, older wiring, but then they put in bigger breakers. So it's now the breaker can handle the load, but the wiring can't, right?
Interesting.
And vice versa.
Okay. Do you know off the top of your head, like what have you seen across the board on, 1,000 square feet, 2,000 square feet, 4,000 square feet? Like, what does it cost if you come up on an inspection? Hey, there's knob and tube that are present and it's active. What are some of the costs to like have those rerun or redo?
I think it really depends on how many circuits are still left. Is it the whole house, right? Or
I know it's a hard answer.
it's a hard answer. I would say, because if you're going to change out a knob and tube, it really depends if the electrical panel are still fuses or has it been updated.
Okay.
If it's been updated and it's just the knob and tube wiring, then it's just running new wire, right?
Sure.
New conductors.
It's super labor intensive.
It is, because you'd have to potentially drill through walls, drill through headers, and all that stuff.
So here's my experience, and I'd love to get your input on this. Okay. So before I got my license, I was working with a architect for a while, helping rehab his historic house on the water here in Larchmont. Frank Hitch, if you remember who that is. And we went through, we rebuilt windows, redid the bay window, took off the old siding. We went from, took off the old aluminum siding, underneath that was cedar, and took it all the way down to the horizontal boards, put zip sheathing up, put up new wood siding. And one of the things we ended up doing was redoing some of the electrical. Now he was licensed and he had done it before, and so I was just learning. At first, I didn't even know what we were doing. He was cutting holes, and I don't know if you can see on camera, but he was cutting holes effectively at the bottom and the very top of because he had 3 floors, at the bottom and the top of every single room. And so we'd have to run it from one room to the next. And so what you end up doing is you run the wire up and you get it at the bottom of the floor and you take it and you take this long kind of fiberglass pole and jam it up the wall through the insulation if there was insulation. And then you'd catch it at the top and run it through. And then you'd have to go use like these 90-degree drills if you wanted to put an outlet. And it's not necessarily the materials, not that materials haven't been really expensive over the last couple of years and have gone up, but it's very labor intensive. And especially if you're going to end up paying an electrician, from what I've seen is it can be as little as $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 for a couple of rooms or a smaller house to $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, depending on the complexity and how many outlets and what actually has to be done. Do you feel like that's a decent description of how it's done and what the cost is?
Definitely. It's always labor intensive when you're trying to run through tight areas and you're trying to get new circuits, new power to places that, if it's an older home, probably the one that you did probably had balloon framing where the studs just went straight up to the second floor. Nowadays they don't do that, right?
Yeah, for the people at home, that typically that you build one floor at a time.
Yes.
It used to be they would put this entire wall up and it would be these super long posts that they would do. It's called balloon framing.
All the way up to the second floor.
Yeah, and so it's easy to fish them
if
up.
you're going to be running new circuits, that's great because you don't have to drill through headers and all that, top plates. But yeah, very labor intensive.
Yeah.
Another, I guess, topic for older home is asbestos, right?
Okay.
And we deal with that a lot, especially when I'm doing inspections in Norfolk and Portsmouth.
Sure.
Right? And a lot of people hear that term, asbestos, and they just like
Freaks out,
right?
Yeah.
But
Can you give me some examples of where would you find that material?
Mostly today, probably still left on some of the older homes on the siding.
Okay.
Right? And it's unmistakable, right? Siding, insulation in the attic. Probably most likely, if they're still using a boiler system, on the piping, the asbestos insulation they wrap to keep the pipes basically to not release, and lose energy. It's sometimes in a crawl space, sometimes in the attic, right? And asbestos is one of those things where, as is, if it still exists, it's still in use, like insulation around the pipe, it's okay as long as it's been encapsulated, right? And the siding around the house.
The key word is what? Friable? Is that what the?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
could you explain what that means for people?
Well, let's see.
Take a drink there.
I'll join you.
Listen, I like to think of it this way. So, asbestos. I just did a training on asbestos in regards to this. Asbestos in manufacturing, it's pretty much in a lot of different products back in the day. It's in flooring, it's in insulation,
roofing,
siding. But is it being dispersed, right? Currently, if it's in place, it's intact, it's okay.
So
right?
friable,
Go ahead.
From what I understand, just means that, let's say that the surface is broken and you're getting fibers into the air, right? And it's that inhalation of those fibers that can cause some serious damage or what you need to be nervous. And if you're going to go and what's called abatement or abate those, which just basically means remove, you have to be licensed, and they come in with big old suits and masks and that type of thing.
Basically tape everything off, right? And then
and it can be kind of expensive.
It can be very expensive.
Yeah.
So as is, if you're buying an older home that has some of these asbestos systems, it's okay. Let's say for siding, you can put vinyl siding over top of that.
Right.
As long as you do not remove it. It's okay to paint over it. You can do insulation. You can put new insulation on top of that.
It's once those fibers get into the air is when it becomes an issue.
Yes.
It's interesting because that's very similar to lead paint, which is I think another issue with older homes. Because one of the things we have in our contracts is this idea of hey, if the house is built before 1978, it likely has lead paint in it.
Sure.
And you can opt to get a lead paint test. This because I see this in the people all the time. Like, well, why would I waive to get a lead paint testing done? I'm like, well, I'm not saying don't do it. You can do it, right? Because this is kind of like what risk. And what, it's like the doctor saying, hey, check for lumps, or, make sure that you do these things, because they don't want to be liable for you not, doing your research or doing the check. So lead paint is kind of one of those issues. It's like, but if it's built before, like, especially even the house that we're in now, it's 1912. My friend, it has lead paint in it, right? The question is it exposed? Is it something that's easily like touchable and accessible? Because kids are kids. Little tyrants that do dumb stuff like lick walls and eat paint chips and stupid stuff like that. And so you just want to be careful that if it is something that is lead paint, well, what's the number one way to address it, or that you see?
Paint over it,
right? Because if you want to go and remove it,
that gets very expensive.
Well, I mean,
right?
imagine every nook and cranny.
Exactly.
Like every trim piece you'd have to go through and scrape out and sand. It's a lot of work.
Yes.
And so
when it comes to lead paint, if you're going to be remediating it, you get EPA involved. And when the EPA is involved, if you don't do it, the company's not doing it correctly.
Sure.
That's a huge fine for the company itself. Not only that, but then, there's...
Yeah, I know 2 or 3 painters that I've worked with in the past that are like, yeah, we don't deal with it. Because I was like, hey, we're looking at, could you do some testing? They're like, I'll test it. That's easy. I just go in there, put a little strip on there, and it'll tell me if it lead. But if you're asking me to abate it or take it, like, we don't do that.
Oh, yeah.
It's just too labor intensive.
I thought about it. I looked into it a couple of years back for my contracting business.
Okay.
The liability for as a contractor, and that's why it's not many painters. And I remember one time you were trying to find somebody on a project that you were doing. You were able to find someone, but not many painters want to deal with that because the hammer that may be put down on you if you do not do it correctly and take the necessary steps is big.
Anything else with old homes you think are worth kind of giving some advice on?
I think for older homes would basically be, besides what we talked about, is HVAC systems. I know most older homes had boilers, and if the boilers are in use, make sure that the systems get serviced just like an HVAC system, just like an air conditioning system. If it's no longer being used because that system still exists in the house, but it's no longer being used, just make sure that it's been properly, the gas supplies capped off. I ran into that situation a couple of weeks ago where did the inspection. I called out the fact that this boiler is no longer in use, and they needed to cap off that that gas supply. They didn't choose to ask for it. Buyer decided to turn on the gas once he moved in. Virginia Gas says, you got to get that taken care of, otherwise we're not going to turn it on. And it cost him, I think, almost $800.
Yeah.
And so, there's a lot of systems to really look into, but yeah.
Do you have any, Sean, how are we doing on time over there?
55 minutes.
Cool. Do you have any YouTube channels or other channels that you follow that you think home buyers or first-time home buyers or anybody who's looking at trying to address maintenance issues or deficiency, like they get this list on the home inspection and you're like, hey, you should totally check out this channel or check out this resource? Or is it just YouTube as a whole? Type in
just YouTube as a whole. I know that I myself, like I said, I read a lot. I watch other videos. There's an extensive. I know This Old Home, right? This Old House, right?
Yeah,
It's been out. I still love that channel.
Yeah.
DIY Network, etc. Doesn't give you a license just because you watched 7 videos to do brain surgery, but there's more resources out there today than it's ever been when I first got into it. And
I had a young gal who I helped her buy a house, and I've kind of in some ways become her like older brother because she didn't have any family, and so every now and then she'll call me and ask questions. And she's like, "Hey, my water heater is leaking," and I'm like, "Okay, wherever." I was like, "Take a video of it and show me what you're talking about." And it was the TPR valve. Or excuse me, not the TPR valve. It was the drain at the bottom.
Okay.
Right. And I was like, "Oh, that's your drain at the bottom." She goes, "Well, what's that there for?" I was like, "Well, technically, most hot water heaters companies will suggest that you drain it and get all the sediment out once a year because you have an anode in there that's sacrificial. Plus, you get bits and pieces that come through the system, picks up along the way, and usually it will settle down at the bottom. And if you want your hot water heater to last the longest it possibly can, you'll drain that and take out those things because it will eat up your elements or eat up the side of your hot water heater. She's like, I didn't know any of this. I was like, well, I was a first-time home buyer once too, and I had to learn all this stuff.
Sure.
And she's like, well, how do I fix it? I said, well, it looks like to me that it's not super corroded. I mean, do you have the money to hire a plumber to come out and take care of it, or are you looking to save some money? And, she just bought a $180,000 house. This was 4 or 5 years ago, and because that would be a $260,000 house today. And she's like, well, if I could save money, so I go in there. I'm like, I guarantee that there's a YouTube video about this.
Definitely.
And I type in hot water heater drain valve replacement, and I found like 4 different videos, and one was put on by like a professional plumber in a studio with the hot water heater cut in half to show you all the pieces. And he's like, you need this part, this tool, this piece. If it's in today, we're working on a Goodman or a State, or and if you're replacing this one, it's part number 1045723. And he's like, all right, so first you're gonna take this tool, then you're gonna drain it out. You're gonna make sure you turn off or you can turn off the thing. And he's like, he goes step by step on how to do it. So he's exactly how to do it, how much tensioning you should be. I was like, man, this is like having a dad.
Deep, yeah.
Like, hey, Dad, help me come do this. He would come over and basically walk through these steps. And so I sent that over to her, and she's like, oh man, this is amazing. He's like, yeah, you have some incredible resources today on YouTube. Now, again, be careful. There are some things like gas and electrical and plumbing that you want to be cautious with. To be honest, if you go to Home Depot or Lowe's and pick up their like first time owner book, or the 1, 2, 3 ABCs of home ownership, they do a really good job in there of saying, here are the list of items that are super easy for you to do, and here's where you need to call a professional. Because you can do the same thing in the car world, where you make a big mistake and you're like, oh shit, now I got to pay somebody to come fix the thing that I even messed up.
Yeah. It's like for gas, right? You technically can't touch and do any type of repair to gas unless you're certified and licensed.
Yeah, that's
a
big boo boo.
That's a big boo boo. Yes.
That's not a mistake you want to make. I think one of the items I'd like to hit on before we wrap up today is because you have the unique experience of both being an investor, both new construction, rehabbing houses. You own something like 20 different rentals or something along those lines, and being an inspector is you have a unique perspective, especially maybe for people that are looking to get into investing. If they're like going out and looking at homes with their real estate agent, right? If you could give them make sure to check these items, just take a look at them. And if this should be maybe the red flags of checking out houses before you get under contract. What advice would you give somebody who's looking at buying?
I think the first and foremost, in terms of the biggest, I guess, cost would be foundation, right, in any house. And of course, you're not going to go into the crawl space, but kind of look around, take a walk multiple times around the house.
If they'll let you go in the crawl space, why not?
Why not, right? Yeah. Look for things that might be signs of cracking foundations. And there's a difference between just typical settlement as well as versus structural cracks. But pay attention to moisture stains, right, in the ceilings, because look at the roof, right? Does it look good? It seems like there's a lot of moss and whatever growing on there. Look at foundation walls. Make sure that it's not leaning. Because everything else, like, air conditioning systems, it's replaceable. Water heaters are replaceable very easily. So when, as an investor, when you purchase a house, you're always going to put money in there, right? But what is going to be the most costly for you to fix? You walk inside the flooring. Is it you're walking next? You're going downhill.
Well, it's super important for anyone who's looking at getting into investing. Let me say that word properly. That the more work the house needs, typically the better your numbers are, because other people don't want to mess with it. And especially if you can go in there and do the work, that's where the term sweat equity comes from, is you're putting in the sweat, not paying somebody else's labor. Like if you ever look at, if you hired 3 plumbers and they actually give you a scope of work, here's all the cost of material and here's all the cost of labor, 2/3, if not more sometimes, is that labor category. And so if you can go in there and do a decent job yourself as a DIY, you'll save yourself a lot of money. And especially if you're going to buy it and do it yourself, your numbers start to improve a little bit better. But like you kind of said, is it's really hard to DIY severe foundation issues. It's really hard to DIY massive moisture issues. It's really hard to DIY, like let's just say that the old slate roof is in terrible condition, right? Well, you got to remove all that slate. It's a pretty expensive job to do roofing. Plumbing, major leaks. Well, how far did that leak? How bad did all that water get into the subfloor? How far did it go?
Sure.
But, fixtures, come on, man.
Yeah.
Like, hot water heater is probably one of my biggest pet peeves when people are like, oh my gosh, a hot water heater is past the life age. I'm like, okay, the hot water heater is located in the garage on top of a concrete platform. Yes, it's 20 years old. But it's so easy to replace these things.
Yeah.
Like even if you were to pay a professional, we're talking $1,000, right, for a 70-gallon tank to put in there. Like, come on, man.
Yeah.
But they freak out like, oh my gosh, this has to be done. There's no way I can buy this house. I'm like, oh my God. Okay, calm down. It's a little ridiculous.
That kind of goes in hand when I come up to a house when I'm inspecting. When I walk into to the front door, I'm not looking at the bells and whistles, the beautiful granite and whatever. I'm there more structural and more function, right? So as I'm looking for a property for anyone who wants to invest, kind of have that mindset, right? You're not there to look at look at this terrible cabinet. It looks how bad this bathroom looks, right? Because it's all
salmon
replaceable.
or mint
Exactly.
colored tile.
Look at the potential, right? And pay attention to what's going to most likely cost you a lot. Are all the windows, do they need to be replaced, right? Because windows, exactly. All
right, well, let's end on Chris Wynn's top 3 pieces of advice for home buyers.
Top 3, basically, trust in your team. Right, whether it's your home inspector, the realtor that you choose to work with you, rely on their experience. Secondly, basically, I think very important is to come with an open mind, meaning don't far exceed expectations in terms of, for a home inspection at least, that we're going to basically find everything like we're walking through with a magnifying glass.
Okay.
Right? Every house has issues. Are the issues repairable? Can you live with them, right, until you can repair them? And last but not least, do your research. Do your resource. There's a lot of if you're looking to move into an area that you're not familiar with, check out some of like your videos, right? And then from there,
living in
check out
Coastal
your
Virginia
exactly,
YouTube channel
right?
plug there.
Exactly,
Very nice.
right? Because you've done the legwork on a lot of those issues, and basically,
it's always I've brought this up on the channel multiple times. It's hilarious to me how, like, I'll have someone who's like never bought a house before call me from YouTube channel. Hey Dan, we're moving to the area. Will you help us buy a house? And we'll start the process, go through the home buying process. And I'm like, they spend so little time understanding the process or diving into what escrow means, or and I get it. You're only buying or selling houses once every 10 years, right? That's kind of the national average right now. But when they go and buy a pellet grill, they will spend dozens and dozens of hours watching people do it, doing the comparison videos. How do you do it this? Is this hopper hold this much? And they will do dozens of hours of research. But they're going to, $500,000 house, $750,000 house. They know jack shit about like the home buying process.
But then that's why having and trusting your team is very important, right?
Sure,
Who you
sure.
choose,
You don't have a team helping you buy a pellet grill.
Exactly.
Like
So you got and so.
Personal. This is for me. You read any good books recently? Or listen to any good books?
When I was flying out to the Dominican Republic with my wife and family 2 weeks ago, I started reading a book that I received on my birthday about 2 years ago, and I finally was able to start reading a book. I'm a huge presidential autobiography or biography.
Cool.
So
who was it on?
Obama.
Cool.
Yeah, yeah. So
Awesome.
I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of, I guess, important people in my lifetime.
Sure.
So I like to read up on them and see how they are. But I love reading about that. I love documentaries in general. So
Yeah. As a professional, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
As a professional, let's see. I don't know if it's received, because I think it's the same model that carries me through all my inspection. Is it comes back to what we started out today is inspecting every house like it is for your family. And for me, that's very important, because people are spending a lot of money, and there's potential children living in this house.
Sure.
So inspecting every house like it's for my own family.
Yeah.
And that's the piece of advice that kind of like been engraved in me with family, and then I kind of extend that in my own way when it comes to inspections.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's easy sometimes when you're in the entrepreneurial grind of knocking stuff out to be hyper focused on, profitability and the numbers, or even if you've just done it for the billionth time, to be like, all right, well, here's another home inspection. And then you just don't ever want to forget that, especially if it's their first time.
Sure.
If you are lackadaisical about it, if you don't care about it, and make a major mistake, for that person who's bought their very first house, $200,000 townhome, and let's just say it's a $10,000 mistake, and let's just say that someone can get away with it. When they go to sell, especially in the market that we're not in anymore, they might have to eat that, and that might take away all of their profitability of buying a house, and it's gone. And for that family, when they're really young, that eats a ton into their home ownership experience, whether it's profitable for them, whether it's a good experience or not. It makes a really big difference in their world. I would honestly say, like, there have been times where I've engaged with someone and I can tell that they had a really bad experience with another real estate agent, and I have to kind of overcome that bad experience.
Sure.
But I really like that concept of I'm doing this, and their baby's involved. There's a family involved.
Sure.
Their future is involved. And I think sometimes if you take a step back and you go, I get the honor of being part of that. Like, how cool is that? I have the privilege to engage with this family in that part of their life. It may only be for 2 hours, but they hired me. No one else. They hired me. And I think that's a privilege that when you approach it from that perspective, it kind of changes how you see the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Chris,
if you love what you do, it's not work, right?
Well, I mean, it's
Most of the
sometimes,
time.
yeah,
Most
sometimes,
of the time.
but I really do enjoy work.
Yeah.
I enjoy working with you.
Sure. Likewise.
If I can leave you with some like, it might be awkward, but affirmations. I really respect you as a professional. I've really enjoyed working with you. I think you're excellent with clients. And there's zero hesitation ever that I get when I get the opportunity to recommend. I'm like, oh yeah, you should talk to Chris. He'll take care of you.
Thank you.
So I appreciate you. Thanks for coming on today.
Definitely.
All right, brother.